This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on developments in Ukraine. The participants are Dilip Sinha, former diplomat, and Sanjay Jha, journalist.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin ordered a military operation in Ukraine's eastern Donbas region, but what's been launched goes far further and amounts to full-scale attack on the country. Russian military vehicles were seen breaching the border in a number of places in the north, south, and east, including from Belarus. Ambassador Sinha, how do you see this development?
This is a very serious development. Many people had believed that President Putin would threaten but refrain from taking military action, and that this was brinkmanship, but they would not cross the Rubicon when it came to taking military action. But obviously these optimists have been proved wrong. President Putin has gone in for not just a limited military operation, but what seems like a full-scale military operation. By a limited military operation, I mean a military operation which would have been confined to the Donbas region, which is the region that has now been recognized by Russia as an independent country, and the troops would be moving in to protect the people there. But it seems from reports that there is shelling of other towns, including the capital Kyiv, Odessa, the port of Ukraine. Now, these are areas outside the disputed area of Donbas region. So the military action seems to be a full-scale military operation. It's a full-scale military invasion, although President Putin calls it a special military operation. So it's a situation fraught with grave danger.
As you rightly said, situation is fraught with great danger, and Moscow had launched an all-out invasion of Ukraine by land, air, and sea this early morning. I mean, it's the biggest attack by one state against another in Europe since World War II. President Zelensky has declared martial law in the country, and Ukrainian foreign minister has vowed to fight and defeat Russia. In this situation, Russians have been demanding the UN to do everything possible to stop what it says is a full-scale war. European Union has said it's one of the darkest hours for the Europe since World War II, and Russia will be hit with massive sanctions. American President Joe Biden has said that the world will hold Russia accountable, predicting major loss of life. So all these powers, they have been negotiating, they have been trying to persuade President Putin not to go for such an offensive, but it seems to have the diplomacy has failed.
Yes, quite certainly. I don't think diplomacy was given much of a chance, but whatever little chance it was given has failed. Why I say the diplomacy was not given much of a chance is that the Security Council never really intervened in the matter. Now has the UN Secretary General been able to send a special envoy, as he usually does, to when there is a crisis in Asia or in Africa. But in this crisis in Europe, it is the big powers who were talking to each other themselves. So President Macron and Chancellor Scholz went across to Moscow. But the rhetoric was very high from the very beginning. And President Biden took a very strident stand on the situation. So both sides locked themselves into very unenviable positions, and positions from which they could not withdraw and give diplomacy a chance. The result has been that now when President Putin has thrown the gauntlet and given a challenge to the West is now in a dilemma on how to respond. So far, it has been talking about sanctions and it has imposed sanctions, but this is a completely different situation. The only thing we have to see is how does NATO respond? Now, you mentioned the situation in Europe. Well, Europe has had situations of this kind in the past also, whether it was in the breakup of Yugoslavia or the Soviet invasion of Hungary and Czechoslovakia. But in the recent past, this is certainly unprecedented and extremely dangerous.
The Ukraine crisis also creates a big dilemma for our country. Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar is meeting ambassadors from the European countries this week, and we have seen people have been trying to flee the capital Kyiv, and there is a palpable sense of shock. Thousands of our students and other citizens are stuck in that country. Although India tried to evacuate them in the last few days, but still there are so many people still stuck. What is India going to do in this crisis?
Well, India's ambassador to the UN in the Security Council has appealed for de-escalation of the situation and giving diplomacy a chance to resolve the matter. But it's a great situation, a dilemma for India, both on the political front and on the humanitarian front. You mentioned the humanitarian aspect of the fact that there are about 20,000 Indians over there, most of them students who are studying in various universities and colleges in Ukraine. They have to be evacuated. their families would be very worried in India, and they would put pressure upon the government to try and evacuate them as quickly as possible. In these situations, there's always a dilemma as to when to leave, because most people feel that there would not be a war. Therefore, they stay on till the very last, and then when shelling actually starts and the airport shuts down, then they are left with no option but to flee across the border, and there are all kinds of difficulties. So for India, that is a difficult situation on finding ways to evacuate. Now, of course, evacuating through the Kyiv airport is out of the question. They'll have to move across by land to some neighboring countries and then be evacuated. And then there you have issues of visas, because for the Indian passport, your visa is limited to the country that you're given the visa to. But there's also the larger dilemma of India's taking sides between Russia and the US. We have good relations with both countries, and we don't want a situation where either side feels let down by India's stand. So India has carefully sought the middle path by not having to make any value judgment on the situation yet, and highlighting the humanitarian problem that we are facing today.
As you rightly said, because an aerospace is not available in the capital city of Kyiv, so there's a high-level meeting in Indian government, and they're developing contingency plans. But there's one interesting development. Ukrainian ambassador to India has said the Prime Minister Modi can convince President Putin from stopping this war. You think India can have such a leverage on President Putin?
I don't think we have much of a leverage on President Putin, because he is obviously too far down the line to listen to advice coming from India. But nevertheless, I think the appeal that was made by our PR in the Security Council certainly amounts to an appeal to Russia to control its forces. And now, whether Prime Minister Modi will speak to Putin or not, I can't say. But certainly, I think all-out effort should be made by all political leaders to see to it that this situation does not escalate any further, and diplomacy is given a chance.
At the beginning of our discussion, we said that President Biden has said that the world will hold Russia accountably. What does he mean by that? Do you think there could be sort of an army from different countries going and stopping the Russians?
Well, accountability, of course, rests with Russia, because they are the ones who have used force in entering the territory of another country. But whether this accountability will stretch to something more than sanctions remains to be seen. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, so NATO is not obliged under the treaty to step in and defend Ukraine. But given the rhetoric that has been used in the past, it is possible, if the situation deteriorates, for NATO to use force. Now, that would be a first in Europe after the Second World War, because so far, whether NATO carried out actions, let us say in Yugoslavia, or earlier the Soviet Union carried out actions against Hungary and Czechoslovakia, in those cases, other side did not intervene. So it remained a unilateral action of one or the other power alliance. If NATO intervenes in Ukraine now, it will lead to a direct military confrontation between superpowers, Russia and the US, or Russia and NATO. And that will obviously escalate very rapidly into a war that will be very destructive for Europe as well as for the rest of the world.
Some quarter in the world is saying that Putin is spinning a conspiracy theory that Ukraine is plotting to acquire nuclear weapons. Putin has also threatened that anyone who tries to interfere will be treated as a full-scale war. So where do we see this coming to an end? UN Security Council has not really played its role, and we saw a tense exchange between Russian ambassador, Ukraine's representative to the United Nations when they had a Security Council meeting. So if none of these people are coming to intervene, where is the war going to end?
Well, the basic dilemma for the world today is that the main organization created to maintain international peace and security, which is the UN Security Council, has been over the decades completely debilitated by the big powers. The result is that the Security Council is in no position to intervene. It has no powers to do so. And if tomorrow the US introduces a resolution condemning Russia in the Security Council, Russia will veto the resolution. Now, in terms of moral authority, again, the West does not have moral authority, because the West has exercised the so-called right or responsibility to protect in Libya and in Yugoslavia, which at that time Russia had criticized. Now, Putin is exercising that same responsibility or right, and he claims that he has the right to go in and protect the Russian minority in Ukraine. So the fact that Kosovo, etc., took place a long time back, over 20-25 years ago. And in this century, this is the first major confrontation. But the fact remains that the Security Council does not have the moral authority to step in. Now, in fact, it cannot step in because Russia will definitely veto any Security Council action. So the only denouement that we can see of it is that NATO will accept that Russia has taken over certain parts of Ukraine and silenced the government, or it will intervene militarily and escalate it into a full-fledged war of two major powers.
You spoke about how Russians can veto in the Security Council. Another very important member, China, seems to have a dilemma, just like India. On this occasion, we have seen the President Jinping and Putin have placed closer cooperation, and now there are growing economic ties between Beijing and Kyiv. So how is the Chinese seeing this development? Because this unfolding crisis in Ukraine is posing a big diplomatic dilemma for China, because they cannot, while they're sort of trying to develop a relationship with Russians, same time they have a business relationship with Ukrainians.
Well, China also has the same dilemma that India does. China has excellent relations with Europe. It has very good relations with Russia. As you mentioned, it has investments in Ukraine. So a crisis will immediately affect its investments and also force it to take sides. Now, China has also been unhappy with the annexation of Crimea, which China has not recognized so far. And China, like India, also stands by the territorial integrity of countries. So China will be worried about chunk of Ukraine declaring itself independent and then getting recognized by Russia. So this principle of breaking up a country makes it very difficult for countries to endorse.
Coming back to what exactly does President Putin want in Ukraine? Does he want to annex the whole country to Russia and make a bigger sort of USSR? What exactly is the motive of this military strike?
Well, there are various theories about what Mr. Putin wants. One can only guess that. One is that Mr. Putin wants to be given respect. That's what some people have said. But in addition, it's also quite clear now that Putin wants to protect the Russian minority in Ukraine, and relations between the Ukrainians and the Russian minority in Ukraine have been deteriorating in the recent past. And President Putin has accused Ukraine of persecuting the Russian minority. And therefore, this military operation that he has launched, he has defended by saying he is going to protect the Russian minority. So it appears that if that is the limited objective of President Putin, then it is possible to have some kind of a quid pro quo worked out where the Russian minority population of Donbass is allowed certain rights, either as a semi-independent or as an independent region, and the rest of Ukraine is left out of the military operation. But that remains to be seen.
You mentioned about Russian perspective about this attack. The Ukrainians have been asking this question to Russians, that what are you fighting for and with whom? And Ukrainian President Zelensky spoke through a video to the Russians. So from Ukrainian perspective, what is the road ahead for them?
Ukraine is in a very difficult situation. The Ukrainian president has taken a very strong, very strident stance. He did not implement the Minsk agreement signed some 8 years ago, which was to give autonomy to this region of Donbass. So he obviously did not play his cards correctly. He misread Russian intentions. And now he's in a dilemma because he has been confronted with the Russian military power and he doesn't know how to deal with it. If he had perhaps handled it a little more carefully, he could have possibly worked out some kind of an arrangement. But he possibly hoped that NATO would come to his rescue. But whether NATO comes to his rescue or doesn't, in both situations, Ukraine as the center of a war will get destroyed if there is military operation from NATO, or if there is no military operation from NATO, in which case the Russian forces may actually walk in even beyond the Donbass region into the rest of Ukraine and take more territory.
In fact, some of the news reports are saying that the Russian ground forces have already crossed into Ukraine. At the same time, the world leaders, French President Macron has called for a NATO summit as soon as possible to bring the peace between two countries. Let's hope that the peace prevails soon. Thank you so much for your time, Ambassador Sinha.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on developments in Ukraine. The participants were Dilip Sinha, former diplomat, and Sanjay Jha, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official.